Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sheil Kohli. I'm the Head of Corporate Communications for Asia Pacific at Credit Suisse. And it's a great privilege to welcome you all today to this luncheon keynote address, the last for the 18th annual Credit Suisse Asian Investment Conference. Now, as many of you know, CCF is one of the fastest growing charities in Cambodia, and in the decade since it has been established, has had a remarkable impact on that country. A country which, I'm sure you're all aware, in the 20th century suffered one of the most brutal political regimes to have existed, certainly in Asia, possibly anywhere in the world. The Cambodian Children's Fund is a long-term charity partner for Credit Suisse and is committed to providing care and shelter for vulnerable children and their families by providing life-changing education, health care, and nutrition. The founder, Scott Neeson, himself has a remarkable story. Before he even came to Cambodia, he spent 26 years as a dominant figure in the film industry, serving among other roles as the president of 20th Century Fox International and executive vice president of Sony Pictures Entertainment. He managed revenues in excess of $1.5 billion, and he oversaw the release and marketing of several blockbuster household movies, including Braveheart, Titanic, Star Wars, and X-Men. It was when he was visiting Cambodia by chance that he had a life-changing revelation. He saw the abject poverty in Phnom Penh and across the country, and literally on the spot decided to give it all up. He is a rare philanthropist because he's also very, very actively involved every day in his cause. Through his work, he has positively influenced the lives of countless Cambodians, and the programs that he leads have literally saved hundreds of lives. Perhaps more importantly, Scott is ensuring that these children, as the country's future leaders, have the strength and the fortitude to take Cambodia forward. So a career move from the glamour of Hollywood to the frenetic city of Phnom Penh in Cambodia is not a very typical path chosen by many. But for Scott, this transition has provided a hope for thousands of children in Cambodia to find a way out of the grinding poverty in which many are born and often fail to escape. Thanks to Scott, many of the children in Cambodia have a future now that is looking increasingly bright. Please join me in welcoming Scott Neeson to the AIC.
Thank you, Sheil. Thank you. Live, I have my water. First of all, thank you, Sheil. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. I'm going to ask you to help me out because it's a unique, special moment for me. We've got a charity that is based in Cambodia that has been fairly low profile. So, a lot of you are finishing up today and you'll be going back to pack your bags and sort your business cards, put your wedding rings back on, that sort of thing. But if you could bear with me, put yourself in my shoes. What if you had truly the best charity in the world and you have 20 minutes to prove it? Few people go there. It's a 3-hour flight, literally, from Hong Kong direct, and most of you have spent that much time in the elevators, I think, the last few days. But if you can get across there and see it for yourself, it becomes very clear what we're doing there. It works whether you view it from the outcomes, whether you look at it from the financial management, the model that is interdependent, which allows us to grow education, leadership, bring the families along, and make each of those steps sustainable. So, if worst case scenario, we did fall over tomorrow, everything we had done up to that point would remain in place. And that's really one of the hardest goals of, I think, any organisation. So I've got to try and explain all this in all the different aspects in a very short period of time, 20 minutes and 21 seconds. So we'll start off with the great story of my Hollywood days. And it's actually, even though I have trouble believing it, I was a projectionist back in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And I did work my way up through the ranks, moved to Los Angeles in '93, and became president of 20th Century Fox International in 2000. And we released some of the biggest films. By the end of my tenure, we had 7 of the top 10 films of all time internationally. So it was a really good life. It was everything they say about the Hollywood lifestyle, the fast cars, Academy Awards, and hanging out with the movie stars. And from a guy from working class industrial city, it was a real trip. I'd actually tried to get a job on the General Motors factory line when I was 16, and I was rejected because I didn't have my high school certificate. So the next available job was working as a projectionist, and that's where I began and worked up from there. So to find myself in Hollywood was a wonderful thing. And these are the films I worked on. That is my boat actually down the bottom there, the bottom left, very aptly called No Ties. So how did it all begin? I'd given up the role at 20th Century Fox because I was joining Sony Pictures. They were a mess, almost as much as they are today with the email scandals, but they would bring me on board to fix up International. They made me an even better offer. It was, Hollywood pays very big money. I know most of you here are on $20, $30 million a year, but for me it was a lot of money. You'd have a good lifestyle. It was all the glamour. Took a 5-week sabbatical to travel through Asia, see the Buddhist monuments, and I ended up in Phnom Penh on the way to Angkor Wat. And a friend of a friend took me out to the landfill of Phnom Penh called Stung Meanchey. And to be honest, it was poverty voyeurism. I wanted to see what poverty looked like. I had a number of prejudices against charities. So you don't know where the money's going. You don't feel like it's your problem. It's such a vast problem that what can I as one person do? But I went out to this garbage dump and it was just the apocalypse. It was 11 hectares of the most putrid garbage. There was between 1,500 and 2,000 children living there. There were no services there, no social services, no NGOs that were helping the children there. And it was a really shocking moment. It was, you come face to face with your values. I met a girl there at the time. I didn't know if it was a girl or a boy. It was very malnourished, covered in rags, wearing every piece of clothes she owned. Met with the mother. And within an hour or so, having a corporate background and all about logistics, problem solving, with the translator, a friend who's a translator, he and I worked out getting Nikki off the garbage dump, putting a family into a house, getting her into school, providing $5 a week, rice, and her little sister was dying of typhoid. She only had a few days left, and then we got her into hospital. And after an hour and $35 a month, all of a sudden I'd saved and changed a life. And that was when the hook was in. Just to give you an idea of what it was like when I first arrived there, I've got a short piece of footage here. It's raw footage.
Yeah,
clean.
5-10 ngày.
Yeah.
5-10 ngày.
We have bus, Lantini. So, I actually didn't go, that wasn't the single turning point. I wanted to make, I felt that I could make the two worlds coexist. I could live in Hollywood and set up the charity in Cambodia. And I started this ridiculous cycle of 3 weeks in Los Angeles, 1 week in Cambodia, and it was frenetic. But the hook was in. I knew that it wouldn't sustain. I made myself a promise that it would be 1 year before I made a hard decision, because being in Hollywood, you see the worst midlife crises known to mankind. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So after a year, I had sold everything, sold my house, all the material goods. And a year to the day, I was working on a very big release. This is a hand-on-heart true story. I'd left one of our big actors, one of the top actors in Tokyo. He was there doing publicity, had his G4, his whole entourage. And I flew from Tokyo to Phnom Penh, went straight to the garbage dump. And I got out of the car, and two old ladies came over jabbering away, and they'd found a group of children and took me over there to the corner of the garbage dump. There were 4 children who were in the last days of typhoid. They'd been suffering typhoid. 40% of the children there had been left there by parents who no longer wanted them. And here was I, unmarried, lived a privileged lifestyle. I had no idea what I was going to do. These 4 very sick children. And at that very moment, my phone rang, and my office patched through the actor and his agent. And there was a moment of real drama, because the actor would not get on the G4. We had put on a PlayStation instead of an Xbox. We were Sony, we put on PlayStation. And he refused to get on the jet. And he was vile, he was very angry. And there was a pause during the conversation, and he went very quiet and he said to me, "You know, Scott, my life was never meant to be this difficult." And the wonderful thing was, it was a beautiful moment. I almost wanted to fall to my knees, because I was leaving a 26-year career. And if you want a validation that you're doing the right thing, there it was. Yeah, if he was there, I would have kissed him. It was just this beautiful thing where all of a sudden it all fell into place, that this was the right thing to do. So I went back to the US, sold my house, boat, had a Porsche, SUV. The house was in Brentwood, all the furniture, everything I owned. The hardest part was I had 2 lovely dogs, Molly and Ruby, who I adored, had to give them away. I'd been dating a Cuban-American model actress for about 18 months and broke up with her. And as I say, to this day, I still miss those dogs. So, to put it into a very much a statistical sense of what we're facing, when I arrived there in 2004, public school enrolment, only 45% of children were in school every day. Daily absentee rate of those who were registered was 55%. Those who graduated through year 12, less than 3%, and one of the highest maternal death rates in the region on the Stung Meanchey district on the garbage dump, between 8 and 12%, depending on the sources. So I went to work having no idea of what NGOs did, and that, I think, was one of the strengths, because we're starting from fresh. The dream was to have an education program that could get children off the garbage dump and into school. It was that simple. Ideally, 80 children, maybe even 100. And today we have 2,450, 2,460 by the time we finished the presentation. But we ended up building the programs. We put in a food program, healthcare for the children, and slowly grew the program so that all aspects of the child's care were being taken care of. The big change, I think the biggest lesson I learned, and it was something you can only understand and identify if you're actually living there on the ground, and I do spend every night, 7 nights a week in the communities, is that you damage the family and you damage the child's relationship with the family when you take the child into school, even if they don't live there. You've got a child who's getting all the food, nutrition, good education, healthcare, but they're no longer working. The siblings are hungrier. The mother often can't pay the rent. And from the child's perspective, they are trying to progress through education while carrying this sense of guilt that their siblings haven't got the same privileges, that the mother can't pay the rent. And nearly every family there lives there because they have debt from medical costs. They come in from the rural communities. Interest rates are 10 to 20% per month. And they're going there not poor, but actually in serious debt. And interest is paid daily, $1, $1.50 a day. So we started to provide incentives for the families. We don't give cash, it doesn't work. But we did start having rice vouchers for those who attended regularly, subsidised rice. And last year we started a incentive where if your child had perfect attendance, no absentee, you would get free rice, 10 kilos for the month. And the children who come every day without absentees went from 2% to 52% in the last 12 months alone. We have maternal health care, fresh water. We have a granny program where the young teens are responsible for looking after the grandmothers. The grandmothers are responsible for teaching values, wisdom, the things that were killed out in the days of Pol Pot. And we built this interdependent group of programs where everyone has a role, everyone's got accountability, responsibility, whether you're a grandmother or you're a teen or even a 7-year-old who's got responsibility of looking after siblings. The 2 pillars are education, a promise that if you start with CCF, we will take you as far as you can go, including university. And the other pillar is leadership. We want the kids to be confident, a good degree of self-esteem, public presentation skills, being able to talk about human rights, budgeting, how to handle money. Because even around the world today, there are so many well-educated people that are underemployed. Some of you are squirming in your seats as I say this. They're underemployed and not using the education to change their society. So it became a really important part to have these 2 pillars in the whole community thing. So the program started, as I said, with education. And this is the new Rice Academy. John and Cami Rice built this school for us, or they paid for the school. It's inquiry-based learning. It's a top facility in terms of its top education. We've taken curriculums from Singapore, Cambridge, the best around the world, and the results have been terrific. At the top of the incentive program is free housing. We have an association with the Cambodian organisation, the Canadian organisation. I always get those two confused. Canadian organisation based in Vancouver. Every house they sell in the US, mainly Hawaii or Vancouver, we get $2,000 to build a house. We're now building them in villages that have toilets, electricity, edible gardens, vegetable gardens, play areas, and to qualify, all you need to do is get your child to school regularly and no domestic violence, substance abuse. And so far we've gifted 240 homes over 17 communities, and the change has been magnificent. In each of the villages there's grandparents who keep an eye out, because every grandparent, the grandmothers especially, love to talk smack. So if someone's doing something wrong, we hear about it. If it's If someone's gone missing, a new child comes in, we're always we're there, we know about it, and they're wonderful, wonderful educators for our children. And with all of this in place, we got the enrollment rate of schools up to 80%. It was a massive jump. The frustration was that the last 20% couldn't come to school because they were in the most dysfunctional communities. There's 3 or 4 very, very impoverished, fractured communities, a lot of domestic violence, and they weren't able to travel to where our schools were. Credit Suisse funded 3 satellite schools, which allowed us to put these basic schools in the worst areas, 3 classrooms, computer lab, fresh water, so it became the hub for the community, and a food program in the evening where children have no other source of food come for their food. And it's we have in each of these schools now over 200 children who study half-day public school, half-day in our school, and their parents are part of CCF because we need to understand why they weren't going to school, what the issue was. So this is actually the land where the very first school was built. The girl here now is in grade 6. She's 6 years old. She's in grade 1. She started schools. So we have the 3 satellite schools now. They're running at capacity. We have ward housing adjacent to it. And if we look forward at the statistics, the public school enrollment rate's now at 100%. Technically 99.5 because children still come in from provinces, but it's essentially every child there is now in school. We have 6 satellite schools operating. There's a great funding model that runs alongside it, which makes the schools very sustainable. Absentee rates now 3%, 2.7 last year, lower than Australia, America, any of the developed economies, because we have these incentives in place. Year 12 graduation is at 55% and growing, and maternal death rate's actually the lowest in the world. We've had 800 births, and we've never lost a mother. That's because, again, it's embedded in the community. The junior leaders look after the mother, the grandmothers teach about how to breastfeed, pre and postnatal. It's cheaper and more effective, I think, than any other program of its kind, but it has to remain embedded in the community, and that's something the larger organisations and the aid organisations can't get their mind around. In terms, since you're financial people, of course, in terms of our financial management, we're one of the highest scoring charities in the world on Charity Navigator. We're at 95% overall, and look at your favourite charity. Please compare, see where they're at in terms of transparency, financial accountability, compliance, privacy policy, boards, the works. The most pleasing was another charity evaluation service in the US, great non-profits, and for 2014 we were ranked the #1 education charity in the world. They track 1.8 million charities based on peer ratings. So we're #1 in education, #1 in philanthropy, which is the management, financial management, #2 in international, and I believe #1's a Parrot Rescue Association. I'm not exactly sure. It seems to have changed somewhere along the lines. So right now, we've got the education program in place. We've got the critical mass of students. We don't want to go any further in terms of increasing the numbers. So 2015 is all about preparing the children for careers, for the social changes when they leave, prepare them for where the real jobs will be, civil engineering, science, the mathematics, a really strong STEM-based education. This is the land. This photo was taken very, very recently. We've just got funding from Velcro, of all people, the black sticky stuff. They're now funding our new higher education facility, which starts work in May. That's this place. It'll have 3 labs in there, chemistry, physics, biology lab, teacher training for all teachers. It'll have lockers, change rooms for kids who have got no place to stay. We're also expanding the Credit Suisse school. It's full now. We're given funding to buy a piece of land there, 2,000 square metres. So it'll become another community centre, schooling, healthcare. And we have 300 more houses to build this year. So it's a model that I believe makes the mark no matter how you evaluate it. It's been a remarkable experience, the best and most difficult 10 years of my life. But this is the year, in 2015, everything's locked down. It's about improving the quality. Public school improvement is working with the government to improve the public school system, which is still a mess. I just wanted to leave you with a very short video. We turned 10 years old last December, and that, one, I got my citizenship. I'm now a Cambodian citizen. And two, it was a wonderful mark because everything came into play. We hit all of the outcomes we wanted in terms of education, leadership, maternal care. Every member of society is now brought into the community. There's no dependence, and it's turned into a wonderful thing. And this is our 10-year. I'll leave you with this and be right back.
These are just flames burning in your fireplace. I hear your voice, and it seems as if it was all a dream. I wish it was all a dream. I see a world turning in on itself. Are we just like hungry wolves howling in the night? I don't want no music tonight. You go on like you once were. Every time I hear another story of the poor boy lost his head, everybody feels a little crazy. They go on living with it. Yeah, they go on living with it. These are just flames burning in your fireplace. I hear your voice, and it seems as if it was all a dream. I wish it was all a dream. You go like you once Every time I hear another story of the poor boy lost his head, everybody feels a little crazy, but they go on living with it. Yeah, they go on living with it. Ooh, yeah, ooh. Tell you one thing, ain't gonna change much. Sun still rises.
So that's the story there. If there's anything you could do, it'd be to research us. Everyone looks at return on investment, and if you look at what hits the ground, we spend 4% of a relatively small amount of money on fundraising compared to 12, 15% of the largest organisations. I live there. I get paid less than most of your maids. It really has got on-the-ground impact. It's a return on investment initially to save a child's life because they are dying. They're dying of malnutrition, they're dying of hepatitis, abuse, they're being trafficked. That was the first thing we do. And the return on investment really hits home when they graduate from university or into a vocation and they've got community leadership skills. They're building a new society. Our model of this is a young woman called Mom, 15 years old, when I met her on the garbage dump, hadn't been to school, has never been to school, but we finally got her off the garbage dump. She couldn't leave because her mother needed her working. But she's now 21, and last year she was selected as BBC's 100 Women to represent Cambodia. She spoke on BBC. She's been to Bangladesh to talk to the garment workers. She spoke on International Women's Day and was down in Sydney quite recently. She was offered her dream job as a fashion designer here in Hong Kong through VF Corp, but she's turned it down until she can find a replacement because she now leads our community leadership program. And I would put you that's probably the best return on investment you could provide. So thank you for your attention. I know you're all probably looking to pack up, but I'm going to hand it back to Sheil now.
Thank you. Scott Neeson.
Oh, we've got one.
That was a truly inspirational talk. I think there may be one or two damp eyes as well after that video. Are there any questions for Scott? There's a gentleman over here.
Thank you for sharing that. That's one of the most remarkable stories I've ever heard. I'm curious about your personal psychology. To give up that kind of privilege is a very, very big move. And you gave us some color, but just from my understanding of human nature, I'd love if you could maybe go into more detail about your transformation. And I'm also curious if there's a religious underpinning to it, if you care to share that or not. But that type of transition that you're talking about, to give up a life that most people work so hard to achieve, that life of privilege, and then to give it up is just amazing. And I guess I'd like to know more about you. If you could, anything else you would share would be fantastic.
It's really hard to explain. It's a very, very personal decision, but at the time that I was there, both standing on the garbage dump for the first time, going back to Los Angeles, I was really confronted by values. You know, you like to think that you're a good person and that you have the right set of ethics, your values match with your lifestyle. However, it became so black and white because of the experience that I could either continue living in Los Angeles and sending money back to Cambodia, or I could change the lives of, back then, as I thought, 100 children. There was a sense of excitement at the opportunity, at what could be done. If we can do this for one child, what could we do on a scale? But it was just this, I couldn't sleep. There was this, it wasn't the nightmare so much of the garbage dump, just trying to rationalise or find a way to rationalise the fact that it was okay to live in Los Angeles and send money over there. That's basically what it was. There's no religious underpinnings. You find your own religion after a while. And as I say, it's been the most difficult, challenging, death-defying 10 years, but also the most rewarding.
Another question? Lady over here? There's a lady over here.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering how helpful or unhelpful has the government been? And also, what's the next step in expansion? Is that deepening your presence, or would you perhaps even look internationally? The government, for the first 5 years, we had a good relationship. They ignored us, we ignored them. We don't pay corruption money, it was fine.
In the last 2 years, there's been a real shift in government towards stamping out corruption, working with the education department. The new Minister of Commerce, Sun Chantol, who is here, is really cleaning up things, making it very investment friendly. The best thing he can do for us is to have a very dynamic economy. So when our kids finally graduate through university, they have jobs to go to, and it's changing very quickly. Part of it is it's a natural progression when the economy improves, and part of it is just the simple fact that the government will lose the next election unless it makes some changes there. And the second question was expansion. This is where I differ from almost every other organisation and why I can't get money from Gates or USAID. I don't believe in capacity building, taking an idea and putting it across the entire country or entire continent. What we have is a model that we want to document this year, record. There's a parallel funding model. It needs to be replicated because if you scale up, like any business, you start to have bureaucracy and you start to have middle management, and that takes away people's independence. It takes away dignity, and you're there forever. It would be like McDonald's trying to run their outlets from a central location in the US. We believe you can take this model or any key aspects of the model and replicate it on a very, very small budget. And you can do that in almost any dysfunctional, war-torn community. And that's the future. It's just to take it, examine the DNA and give this franchise box to someone in, say, Bangladesh to replicate it. Someone young with more energy than me, but that's the plan. I don't think it'll work to take any of those programs and try and expand upon it.
The gentleman there, yeah.
Scott, thank you very much for sharing a very heartwarming story, actually. I must say, I feel quite fired up. My question to you is, it's such a real-life story. I'm wondering why there is no movie on this so far.
I'm scared to put Gary Busey in my role or something. But, I'm supposed to be writing a book this year. I've got a book deal, so I'll start with the book. I'm so over Hollywood. I don't know if I could go through the whole thing. And as the other thing, just from a practical sense, I don't know what the story would be. I can see a series of chapters or anecdotes, but the overall arc of the story, someone else would have to do.
So can we expect a producer, director, and an actor, Scott Neeson's own story in his own version?
I don't know what they'd call it, actually. The book, actually, we have a really strong sponsor program, and the book I'm writing is called I Had a Dog Called Lucky, because a number of people in this room sponsor children, which means emailing backwards and forwards. There's this massive cultural disparity. And in the first month of the sponsor program, a sponsor wrote to the child with pictures of the Labrador. Neil actually sponsors one of our girls, Mouse or Kim. The sponsor sent a picture of the Labrador and said, "Do you have any pets? Do you have a pet dog?" And the girl wrote back, "I had a dog called Lucky, but my grandparents ate him." Oh, God. They said he was delicious, but I miss him. And how you would communicate that, where people some people gasp, some people laugh, some people think it's downright dreadful and worry and concerned about why there aren't better conditions for the dogs. But it's that sort of disparity I still haven't got my mind around yet. And an equally wonderful email just recently was a sponsor who had sent pictures of their garden, landscaping, and they'd said at the end of the email, "We're so glad you like the photographs of our gardens and landscaping, but no, that's not our home, it's where we keep the tool sheds. It's our tool shed." And it was a very sweet little analogy. The child was admiring their house. It was so pretty, colourful and clean. And it was where they'd kept the gardening tools.
Any other questions? This gentleman over here.
How do you choose which children to accept to the program and which not? That's got to be very hard.
It is. It was very difficult in the beginning. We now have a very strict process in place. We accept about 1 in 15 children now. The basic criteria is that they cannot possibly get to school without our intervention, and there is a high degree of risk, either of sexual abuse or trafficking or domestic violence at home. And clearly there's either no parents or parents can't afford to send them to school. But the basic criteria is we would be the only possible option for them to go to school. And it's heartbreaking, it really is, especially with children who are coming in from the national police who've been abused. It's, but we have to keep a limit on it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you for sharing this story. I'm glad to hear that the government left you alone initially. But how about all these criminal organizations? Because human trafficking and child prostitution have been really the serious social problem there. So you are kind of tapping into some of the sources of the so-called raw materials. Then what's happening there regarding the interaction of all these local problem makers?
In the early days, we had real issue because a lot of the children on the garbage dump were being taken away for child prostitution because they weren't recorded. And we took measures, we put an intervention, and there was a lot of very scary times. I had 2 kidnap attempts. Our manager had acid thrown in her face, and it was a brutal few years, but we came through it. Last year we started our child protection unit, and that's been a huge success. Largely thanks to the government. We have 3 Australian federal police who spent time with Interpol and in the region, and the government has allowed us to second 14 hand-picked Cambodian national police. So unlike the other trafficking and child protection organisations, we don't have to build the case and hand it to the police to handle and hope that they prosecute. We can actually cross borders and make arrests on our own. And I think the best measure of the government's cooperation is that there was a dreadful murder of a 6-year-old and her mother, and it turned out that the perpetrator was a senior government official, a general, and we were given the authority to arrest him. He's very angry, but he's in jail now. He'll go to trial sometime in June. And the evidence is 180 pages now of evidence, so wherever we have one of the crimes, there's been 240 crimes given to us, 87% arrest rate, because we now used, for the first time in Cambodia, DNA, fingerprinting, we use crime scene investigations, cameras, and that's a separate part of CCF. But you do make a lot of enemies there, and also with the drug trade, methamphetamine, we've made a lot of arrests in the last 2 months.
So we've got time for one more. Scott needs to catch a plane back to Phnom Penh. The lady over there.
Scott, that was extremely inspiring. I have a question for you in terms of developing your bench of staff. It seems to me that you would be an excellent speaker, as you've demonstrated here. How do you find people to join your organization, deepen your bench, and ensure that it continues to grow and expand after you are, either involved in, international fundraising or...
If I get hit by a truck, you mean? I've looked at it many ways. There's basically 3 aspects in my mind to sustainability. There's the funding, and we're addressing that this year. Child sponsorship's a big piece of it because it's very sticky money that comes in every month. It's covering, it'll cover by the end of next year nearly 40% of our costs. We're putting in place a platform where we can get lower end donors, because at the moment it's been large, opportunistic type money. The funding, I think, will be much more sustainable over the next 15 months. In terms of on the bench, we've now, after 10 years, we've got a terrific team in Cambodia of Cambodians, a management group there, and we have an international COO who came from a public company, took a massive salary cut, and he's joined us, and he's handling the operations, compliance, governance, and the management of all our different offices and audits and one of the things we do need, while I'm plugging things, is we're moving all of our systems into a single accounting system, and that's a massive undertaking. We're looking for someone to embed for 12 months to help us make that conversion. And we have a terrific volunteer program, and so we have got the depth of staff now. We are moving towards a sustainable funding model. The third piece is that if anything happened to me, it would then become someone else's vision. The roadmap is there, but that imprint that I put on it would be someone else's, and that piece I don't want to address.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Scott Neeson.